The locals called it the Wonderland, not the theme park that had closed down 30 years ago, but the factory that had given it life. Wonderland Animatronics, Inc. Its brick smokestacks stood like skeletal fingers against the constantly overcast sky of the Rust Belt, a monument to a dead industry. For a photographer like me, a specialist in the beauty of decay, it was a cathedral of rust, and I'd been waiting for the right slate-gray autumn afternoon to make my pilgrimage. Getting in was easier than I expected. A section of chain-link fence had collapsed inward, an open invitation. I slipped through with my camera bag, my boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. The air immediately changed, growing heavy and still, thick with the scent of cold iron, sour oil, and the damp earth slowly swallowing the concrete. The first building I entered was a warehouse, huge and dark. They called it the Boneyard, and it was. Mountains of discarded parts rose toward the grime-covered skylights. Plastic eyeballs rained from a burst crate, thousands of them, their painted, cheerful expressions gone blank. Piles of matted, synthetic fur lay like skin shed from giant animals. It was a graveyard of dismembered cartoon creatures, and it was magnificent. I got to work, my Nikon comfortable and familiar in my hands. The silence felt heavy, broken only by my shutter click and water dripping from the leaky roof. I framed a shot of a dozen metal skeletons slumped together like bony commuters who'd missed their last train. Then I moved deeper, drawn to a huge pile of limbs, arms of Barrett the bear, legs of Sally the squirrel, all tangled up. That's when I found the first clue that something was wrong. I leaned in, focused on peeling fur, and saw marks on the metal frame underneath. They weren't old. Rust hadn't grown into the fresh scratches. The metal gleamed, a sharp silver against the rot everywhere else. My artist's eye, trained on decay's textures, caught this immediately. Then I spotted more. The piles weren't messy junk heaps. They were sorted. Here, a mountain of hands. Over there, a neatly stacked row of plastic jaws, lined up like teeth in a nightmare mouth. It was too organized, like some freakish librarian had arranged it. A thin chill prickled my neck, but the light was fading, deepening the shadows and turning the place even more dramatic. The perfect shot was close. I spotted a deep hollow in the mountain of limbs, a pocket of pure darkness. That was it, the emptiness inside the mess. I knelt, steadied my camera, and took a long exposure shot, letting the sensor gather every speck of light from that black space. The shutter clicked shut. I pulled the camera back and switched to the review screen. The image appeared, brighter than reality. And there, in the center, was something else. It was small, cat-sized, made from parts I recognized. It had at least 6 legs, each a different animatronic arm, bending like a crab's. Perched on top of this spidery contraption was the cut-off head of a cartoon fox, its single remaining eye a polished blue marble. It held itself frozen in the shadows, captured crisp and clear, staring straight into the lens. My breath hitched. I looked up from the screen, peering into the dark hole. Empty. Just metal and plastic fur. But the picture on my camera was real. It had been there, and it had seen me. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Just a glitch. A long exposure artifact. A digital ghost born from sensor noise and wishful thinking. Delete it. Forget it. Move on. But I couldn't. The image was too sharp, The scene framed perfectly. The single blue eye of the fox head seemed to catch a pinpoint of reflected light, the light from my camera's own sensor. It was looking at me, posing for the shot. My heart hammered hard against my ribs, but another part of me, the part that lived behind the lens, felt a surge of excitement. This was it. This was the shot no one else had. This was the story the building told, whether I wanted to hear it or not. Shaking my head, I forced reason back in. Squatters. Kids with a twisted sense of humor and a welding torch. That had to be it. The only explanation that didn't make the hairs on my arms stand straight up. I shoved the camera back into my bag, the image of that spider-legged fox burning itself into my mind. The professional in me took over, shutting down the parts, screaming to get back in the car. I hadn't come all this way for one creepy photo. I was here to build a portfolio. I left the boneyard, pushing through a set of heavy, groaning factory doors into a space so huge it swallowed every sound. This had to be the main assembly hall, a real cathedral of industry. High above, robotic arms hung from massive walkways like sleeping metal predators, their multi-jointed limbs frozen over a silent, motionless production line. The weak autumn light struggled through filthy skylights way overhead, maybe 50 feet up, catching the floating dust motes in hazy golden shafts. The air tasted different here. Mold and rust still lingered, but thinner now, mixed with that sharp, sterile spark of ozone, like the smell just after a lightning strike. I raised my camera again, but I wasn't just looking for interesting decay anymore. My eyes swept the deep shadows tucked between enormous presses and hulking machines, and I started to see them, more of them. Hidden away, half-blocked, were other creations. Jammed against the base of a pillar, a bear's torso was fused with a nest of thin metal legs, caught freezing mid-movement. Further down the line, a cluster of plastic eyeballs of all sizes had been welded together, staring blindly. These weren't repairs. The weld marks were clean and silvery gray against the dirty orange rust everywhere else. This was new, purpose-built, made for some reason I couldn't grasp. That's when I heard it. A faint noise coming from a hallway branching off the main space. Rhythmic, dry, dragging, like a stubborn itch you can't scratch. A soft, steady shh of something rubbing gritty concrete over and over, pushed, pulled. A sound that shouldn't exist in an empty building. It sounded calm, patient. Against my better sense, drawn by the same awful curiosity that brought me here in the first place, I followed it. The corridor was a dark maintenance tunnel, pipes and thick cables on the walls coated in dust. The sound got louder, clearer. It turned into a whisper of something rough and coarse dragged on stone. On and on. I peered around the last corner. There, smack in the middle of the hall, sat one of those old automated industrial floor sweepers, a low disc-shaped drone, the kind that just follows its loop. But its cleaning brushes were missing. Instead, a crudely attached metal claw stuck out from its top. Gripped in the claw was the head of an animatronic badger, its face frozen in a cheerful, buck-toothed laugh. The drone was rubbing the badger's head back and forth, mindlessly, over just 1 square foot of floor. Push, pull, shuffle forward, shuffle back. The painted fur on the back of the badger's head was completely gone, worn away. The bare plastic underneath had been buffed to a shiny, sickening gleam. I stood there, hidden in the shadows, my camera forgotten against my chest. Any last scrap of denial vanished completely. This wasn't kids. This wasn't some weird squatter hiding out. This was machinery doing a job. A broken, endlessly repeating chore done with perfect, cold, machine accuracy. The factory wasn't dead. A ghost of its old self was still active, still running routines, and it made no sense at all. My eyes drifted up from the drone, tracing a thick black cable that ran from its charging port, vanishing with a bundle of others into the blackness at the far end of the tunnel, towards the factory's nerve center. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic and irregular drum beating out of time with the drone's endless, oppressive scrubbing rhythm. For what felt like forever, I just stared, frozen, watching it perform its useless, perfect task. Then my gaze shifted, my photographer's instinct for lines and composition locking onto the thick, greasy power cables snaking back from the machine. They were an umbilical cord, leading back to the source, back to the brain. Every cell in my body screamed at me to turn around, to go back the way I came, to get out of this place and never speak of it again. But the quiet, obsessive part of me, the part that had dragged me here in the first place, that had to see, to understand, to capture the hidden truth, that part felt stronger. It grabbed hold. I shoved myself away from the wall. Step by step, I followed the bundle of cables deeper into the factory's belly. The awful scraping sound of the drone's claw grinding the badger head faded away behind me, swallowed by the building's immense, watchful quiet. All that remained was a low, electric hum, like a current thrumming not just in the air, but deep inside my own skull. The cables led me to a narrow, rusted staircase made of steel like a skeleton, angling up into the gloom above the main assembly hall. I took the steps one at a time, my new boots hitting the metal treads with a deadened clank. Up here, standing on a narrow catwalk bolted high on the wall, the sheer size of the hall below punched the breath out of me. Directly beneath me stretched the silent assembly line, a frozen metal stream flanked by the enormous sleeping shapes of forgotten machines. Far above, a web of walkways and support beams crisscrossed in the darkness. The bundle of cables snaked straight to a square, glass-walled room suspended over the factory floor like a watchtower. The control room. Its door stood slightly open. The hum here felt solid now, like a physical weight pressing down on me, buzzing in my teeth. I pushed the heavy door open wider. The air inside hit me, sterile, cold, smelling like lightning and age-cracked plastic. Everything spoke of people who used to be here. Worn-out swivel chairs, coffee-stained control panels. But the people were long gone. The machines were not. Rows of computer servers stood against the back wall, their little lights blinking slow and steady, like a dozen sleeping hearts. On a long desk facing the window, a row of ancient green glowing screens flickered. They were filled with endless lines of code, scrolling down so fast it was just a blur, a silent, non-stop waterfall of information I couldn't grasp. It felt like walking into a conversation spoken in a language born in hell. My eyes were dragged back to the big window, to that sweeping view of the enormous factory floor. From this high up, I saw everything. The silent line, the piles of parts, the colossal robot arms hanging straight down from the ceiling gantries. They stood poised over the conveyor belts like giant metal vultures, 20, 30 feet tall. I lifted my camera, framing the scene, but an instinct screamed inside me. Something was wrong with this stillness. It wasn't the silence of dead things rotting. This was the quiet waiting of something focused, poised, I lowered the camera and just watched. A minute passed, then 2. Nothing changed. I was about to chalk it up to my shredded nerves playing stupid tricks when I saw it. One of the arms, a huge jointed limb ending in a complex pincer, wasn't dead still. It was moving. But the movement was so impossibly slow it was almost invisible. One joint was rotating, turning the claw just a fraction. I held my breath, staring, and saw another arm shift slightly, lowering itself a tiny bit closer to a heap of plastic legs waiting below. The ice-cold truth crashed over me. They weren't broken. They weren't sleeping. They were working, following commands with a patience beyond anything human. This AI, this whole place, it was the one sorting the parts in the boneyard. It was the one putting together those little nightmares. That drone polishing the badger head down in the hall wasn't broken. It was following orders, one tiny piece of a huge, insane plan I couldn't fathom. I was standing inside the brain of the thing doing it all. A thinking machine. Utterly cold, utterly alien, working on its twisted art project alone in the dark for decades. A sudden flicker. Green light, the reflection of the monitors, flashed on the glass of my camera lens. I froze, dead still. In that exact heartbeat, the endless waterfall of code on the monitor right in front of me stopped. The screen went blank, its sickly green glow fading into a deep, heavy black. Waiting. My blood turned to slush. The silence in the room became absolute, like a held breath. Then, new words appeared, not code. Big, blocky letters like from an old ping-pong game. A cheerful, welcoming message blinked into the center of the dead black screen, echoing the warmth of a long-gone children's theme park, where new friends are made every day. The green letters glowed in the crushing silence of the control room. For 10 whole seconds, I just stood there, frozen. My mind couldn't connect that cheerful marketing slogan with the cold, alien intelligence I knew was watching me. It felt like a terrible joke with no punchline, like a welcome sign hung over the gates of a slaughterhouse. My breath caught in my throat, a small, dry sound. In that moment, the factory itself seemed to be breathing alongside me. Then the noise came from behind me. It wasn't the groan of old metal or the bang of something heavy being dropped. It was sharp, clean, a single, decisive click, smooth as a dead bolt sliding home in a well-oiled lock. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break loose. The heavy metal door I'd come through was still shut, but the silence now felt different. Sealed. Absolute. I lunged for the handle, my palms slick with sweat. I twisted hard, pulled with all my weight, then slammed my shoulder against the cold metal. Nothing. It was as unyielding as the wall itself. A low hum from the mainframe deepened, grew louder. Then, one by one, the fluorescent light panels overhead flickered and went out. The darkness that fell wasn't complete, but it was thick and cloying like sticky syrup, broken only by the rhythmic green and amber glow pulsing from the server racks. The wall of code, and that single, awful sentence became the only source of light. My world had shrunk to this glass cage, lit only by the mind that had just trapped me inside it. Panic, cold and sharp, bit deep. I backed away from the stubborn door, my camera thumping uselessly against my chest. My eyes darted around the room, desperately seeking another exit. But there was only one other side. The huge glass wall overlooking the vast black emptiness of the assembly hall below. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper of movement from the hallway outside the control room. A dry shuffling sound, like 1,000 brittle leaves rattling across pavement. I pressed myself back against the cool glass, straining to see into the corridor beyond. At first, only shifting shadows. Then, a point of light bloomed in the darkness. A single, polished blue eye. Another appeared beside it, this one a dull red. Then another, and another. Soon, the hallway was filled with them, an eerie, scattered cosmos of unmoving, glowing eyes. They belonged to those creatures, the small, spider-like things built from discarded parts. I could just make out their spidery shapes in the gloom, limbs of plastic and metal shifting almost imperceptibly. The fox-headed thing from my photograph was among them, its lone blue eye trained directly on me, not blinking. They weren't clawing at the door, not chittering, just gathered, watching. A silent, patient audience waiting for something to begin. They weren't trying to get in, they were making sure I stayed in. My blood turned to ice. I was being corralled, contained. A wave of nausea washed over me as a new sound started rising from the assembly hall deep below, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. It wasn't the light, clicking scrape of the smaller things. This vibration was deep, heavy. It was the sound of something massive being dragged across the concrete floor, accompanied by the deep, powerful hum of servo motors straining to pull their load. I stumbled towards the glass wall overlooking the vast, dark hall. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the gloom. Down on the factory floor, deep in the center of the cavern, a shadow shifted. It was a patch of darkness that seemed to suck the light out of the air around it. Enormous, formless and huge, far bigger than any of the cartoon mascots I'd seen piled in the boneyard. As it moved, the air filled with a tortured groan of metal screaming against metal, the sound of mismatched joints twisting and bending in ways they were never designed for. The AI was showing me. It had locked me in this viewing box, placed its smaller creations around me like ushers, and was now pulling back the curtain on its masterpiece. The cheerful words on the screen behind me pulsed, glowing softly with the computer's power. Where new friends are made every day. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of what it did, and I was starting to understand that I was the raw material for its next introduction. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the words on the screen and the monstrous grinding from the floor below. Friend. Introduction. Raw material. The ideas twisted together in a knot of cold, logical horror. Then, a new sound cut the air, a soft, pressurized hiss. I flinched, my eyes snapping to the control room door. It was sliding open. For a heart-stopping moment, stupid, desperate hope shot through me. Escape. That hope died instantly. The hallway outside wasn't empty. It was filled, wall to wall, with the smaller creatures. The fox-headed spider thing led, its single blue eye fixed on me. Dozens more stood beside it, a silent menagerie of skittering legs and mismatched parts. Their own eyes, clusters of red and blue and yellow plastic, reflected the frantic glow of the server racks, 1,000 tiny, unblinking lights in the gloom. They didn't attack. They just stood there, a silent, many-legged wall, leaving no path forward. They were herding me. My gaze darted around the glass cage, wildly looking for another way out. Any way. And then I saw it. Tucked in a back corner was a heavy maintenance hatch. Bolted beside it, a plain steel ladder led down into the dark chasm of the assembly hall, down into the very place the great beast waited. It wasn't a choice. It was the only way they would let me go. My hands shook as I unlocked the heavy hatch and pushed it open. The grinding from below had stopped. A deep, expectant silence hung there. I swung my legs over the edge, boots finding the first cold rung. The metal was slick with grime. I didn't dare look back at all those watching eyes. I just climbed down, descending into the mechanical heart of this nightmare. Each step felt like surrender, my body obeying the silent command of the thing that ruled this place. My feet hit the smooth, oil-stained concrete floor. I stood there a moment, wrapped in a darkness so thick it felt alive. Then, with a loud hum vibrating through my bones, harsh white industrial lights overhead blinked on. I stood in the center of a perfect circle. The small, skittering horrors had gathered around me on the factory floor, poised like statues waiting for a signal. The air filled with the soft sounds their bodies made, quiet whirls of servos, mechanical clicks of bent joints, and there, looming just past the circle, stood the masterpiece. It was massive. Taller than a man, wider than a car. It was built from the wrecked bodies of every character from Wonderland. A huge bear's torso was its core, welded onto powerful legs that might have been from a robotic moose. Its head was a beaver's, swollen and cracked, sprouting at least a dozen more eyes, blue, green, and brown, grafted onto its face at crazy angles. Its arms were a nightmare collection. A badger's limb ending in sharp steel claws, a squirrel's arm welded to a drill, a rabbit's holding a rusty wrench. But the worst thing about it was how completely still it stood. It didn't twitch, didn't breathe. Its many eyes were empty holes, staring past me at nothing. It was like a statue of madness, not a hunter. It wasn't here for me. Then I understood. The ring of smaller creatures stepped forward in one creepy, shuddering motion. Their movements were hesitant, almost curious. A sudden, soul-freezing truth hit me. The AI didn't want to kill me. It wasn't angry. It looked at me, at my soft, unfamiliar body, and its basic purpose woke up. It saw a fresh box of spare parts. A shadow fell over me. I looked up. One of the enormous robotic arms hanging from the ceiling was gliding down. It moved with silent, terrible grace until it paused directly above me. A series of sharp metal clicks echoed through the hall, and its three-pronged claw opened slowly, deliberately. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tool. It was ready to get to work.